Welcome to Business Talk with Meghan McNulty, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of business success and reveals the strategies, insights, and stories that drive these professionals to thrive in the ever-evolving world of business. Whether you're an established entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply fascinated by the world of commerce, this podcast is your front row seat to learn from the best. Each episode, Meghan will bring you engaging interviews with professionals from diverse industries who will share their triumphs, lessons learned, and the insights they've gained along the way.
Hi, Jessica. How are you today?
I'm doing so fantastic. How are you, Meghan?
Wonderful for a Friday. So I'm excited to talk to you today because I feel like people don't know what lobbying is necessarily. They hear about lobbying and they maybe think it's a bad word. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about, what lobbyists do and maybe why they've gotten a bad reputation and why they shouldn't have a bad reputation because they're important.
Yes. So first of all, thanks for having me on. Excited to be here. Jumping into that. So lobbyists, I always say, are educators. We're educators and advocates. And there is no other system set up really to educate lawmakers other than the lobbying system. And if lobbyists didn't exist, then the taxpayer would have to, I guess, pay for some sort of entity to educate the lawmakers on certain issues and industries. And you can imagine how well that would go. They can skew it to their liking, or at least on this side, both sides kind of get a chance. In this model, both sides get a chance to have their side. So one of the cool things about America is that you can come from any walk of life and be elected to Congress, but you typically only have that side, your own experience in your repertoire. So let's just say you're a doctor and you're highly educated on the medical industry, but you still have an equal vote to every single thing. So you're still voting on transportation bills, farming bills, national security. Every single member gets a vote. And so how are you supposed to learn about those industries and their issues? The way that we learn is lobbyists will come in and say, hey, if you vote for this bill, just so you know, it's gonna erase 600 jobs in my client's district. So, oh, really? Tell me more. Why is that? Well, because X, Y, Z. Now, depending on the situation, I may have someone else come in and lobby for it. Well, here's why that's redundant. These jobs need to get cut. We're done with this. It's horse and buggy no more. We're switching over to Model T. Okay, great. So in their wise wisdom, we've elected members who we trust to represent our interests and vote on what they deem is in our best interest on people who we send to Washington. So both sides get a say and the best man wins.
I love it. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into lobbying?
Yes. So I've been in politics for about 15 years, started on the campaign side of things. I'm a huge history buff. I love history. So that kind of goes hand in hand with politics and learning about, different dynasties and wars and leaders. And so I moved to Arizona when I was 18, from Ohio, by the way. I thought a cool way to make friends would be to volunteer on a political campaign. So my very first campaign was Ben Quayle's congressional campaign in 2010. He is former Vice President Dan Quayle's son. And I just caught the bug. From there, I was an intern for Senator John Kyle. And then I started fundraising almost like a volunteer, just raising money for candidates that I believed in. But in the state of Arizona, at least, there's such a dearth of fundraisers that it was actually really easy to break in. So I had candidates calling me, asking me to raise them money. And I think at the time I was like 20 or 21. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay, I guess. And so I went to the Republican Party in Arizona. I said, hey, I'm getting these calls. I've done it for free, but I guess I would like to learn how to do it more professionally. So they set me up with a mentor. I did that. It grew into a pretty successful firm. I moved to DC. I worked on the Hill for Congressman Gosar, one of my former clients in Arizona. He's on the Natural Resources Committee and Oversight. And it's funny, I think when people move to DC, a lot of us watch The House of Cards and The West Wing and The Diplomat, and we get like starry-eyed about all the foreign affairs. And that's super interesting. It's hard not to. And I was no different. But when I left Congress, I became super nerdy about natural resources. Obviously, I was exposed to it because of my boss, but I found out that natural resources touches literally like everything. So we have, if you're using it, like this laptop I have in front of me, the phone that I'm on, the lights up here, anything, glass, it comes from the earth. And this is all part of national security and trade. And if we're not extracting it here, we must extract it from other regions, which are potentially suboptimal from a supply chain standpoint. So I found that people don't understand the value of these critical minerals and rare earths as they apply to their everyday lives. And so when I left Congress, I thought I was faced with either I find a job or find clients. And I was confident that I could find clients. And I specifically sought out clients in that space because it was so interesting to me and touched so many facets that I was fascinated by. So that's what my firm focuses on today.
I love it. So you have your own lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. So you're basically doing federal lobbying as well as state lobbying, correct?
Correct. So I have a lot of connectivity to Arizona still. My business partner, Laura Magnus, my career has been kind of windy. First campaign, then on the Hill, and now lobbying. She's been a lobbyist for 15 years straight. So she and the Arizona State Capitol are like simpatico. She knows everywhere there and everyone. So she came to me and said, hey, I know we've always kind of talked around the idea of doing something together. Why don't we do that? And so as far as our clients go, she has her own firm, Magnus Public Policy, but our firm together, Saunders Global Diplomacy, handles mainly the federal side. And when there's a state nexus, we subcontract to Magnus. So that's how that works.
Amazing. So let's talk about business owners. So why would, your clients are business owners, and basically a lot of them are unaware that they might need a lobbyist. Why would a business owner, let's just say in California, need a lobbyist in DC?
What I like to say is, unfortunately, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And I wish it wasn't the case, but it just seems to be true. It's so much easier to preempt problems than it is to unravel them. So oftentimes we do get the phone call once an industry has been harmed or a company has been harmed. And they're like, I've been, fishing in, these waters for, my family's been here for generations. I've never had any problems. And now all of a sudden I get a notice saying that if I extract more than, X many pounds of shrimp out of here, I'm going to have to pay a fine. What is this about? And so, well, little did you know, for whatever reason, the animal rights lobbyists have been lobbying for the past 5 years to get that law passed, and you had no idea. And now it's going to take me 5 more years to get it unpassed because of the way things are structured. And so ideally, and it's not like the case for everything, but there's so many different, the economy, both domestically and internationally, is so interconnected that there's always so many things occurring that if you're not at least having a pulse in DC, you might be at risk.
That's a good example. Let's just talk about like entrepreneurs, people that are trying to like maybe come up with a new concept or a new business idea. Do you think they typically are hiring lobbyists to have representation in Congress to get their case heard? Okay.
I do. And so actually, it's one of the things that I'm having a great time with more recently is a lot of the startup communities. I find if they were to hire lobbyists, they may not even know what it is or what it's about or what's a lobbyist or what do we do, but they do know that they have a really cool idea and they want to grow their new venture, but there's this regulatory obstacle in place. And so many people think that they just have to work around it. They just think, well, that's just the way it is. And we'll just grow it like this and figure out a way around it. Well, you don't necessarily have to. We could potentially break down barriers for you. And once we break that down, then we can like 10x your business. And again, this is like generality is not always the case. But for example, one of my new clients, I have also a Lycos Advisory Group, which is my own firm here at the federal level. One of my clients in Lycos Advisory Group is a company called Bonus. And so right now there's something called the lock-in effect in Congress or in America, because 50 million Americans secured an interest rate below 4.5% during the pandemic.
Mhm.
And obviously now interest rates are up to, over 7%. So people are not moving. This is a problem. It has reverberations across the economy. And it's something that both sides, both Republicans and Democrats, are really concerned about. And so Bonus offers a unique solution to alleviate some of that pressure. So that's a great example of a startup entrepreneur who's doing everything he needs to do in the private sector to grow his business, but on the public sector, I'm able to tell their story in the halls of Congress and explain to them how this is a unique solution. And we're here to help kind of break that dam a little bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. So interesting. It's like almost impossible to buy a house right now with the interest rates. So if that, it sounds like if that company can offer a solution and you're helping them, it may really, really interesting, actually. Can you tell us your most interesting out of the ordinary client or project, or maybe a project you know about from another lobbyist is working on that's maybe people wouldn't think about?
To me, everything is interesting. We have a regenerative agriculture client called Myland, and they use microalgae and it plugs directly into a farm's irrigation system, and it essentially sprays the plants with like a probiotic for the soil. It's the best way to think of it, and it's fascinating to me because that makes so much sense to me. If we all kind of start from this standpoint and understanding that like human health is gut, or gut health is human health, like all disease tends to originate in the gut. If you think of the Earth's soil as the Earth's gut, we have to focus on soil. And so this to me, I'm like, I love this client because the results of their product is amazing. And so interesting, yes, the science is fascinating, but the passion behind it and the reverberating effects that can occur because of them are amazing. So anything I can do for them, I get a lot of it's very rewarding.
That's so interesting. Okay. So like, it's really a lot of lobbying too is helping entrepreneurs come up with solutions to bring what they're offering to the market. And a lot of the times we do need our federal and state government on board with that. And do you find it's like easy to maneuver, or do things take time? What's like
so it's the state side of things is so vastly different than the federal side, and both are super fun and super interesting. The federal side, it's like a Titanic. It takes a very long time, and very, very rarely are bills voted on in single form anymore. They're usually attached to one of the like big 12 like omnibus vehicles, and they get kind of lumped in together. You'll have like, the Farm Bill, you have the National Defense Authorization Act, and these things, when they get voted on, you just really hope that you're on the ship, because once that ship leaves dock, you're going to be waiting another year at least until you can there's another one that's going to leave the dock. Now at the state level, Laura, she'll tell me, hey, I woke up this morning and heard that, member so-and-so is going to put our bill on the floor. Well, we know that we're 3 votes short. If that bill goes to the floor today, it's going to fail. So we now have 3.5 hours to whip 3 votes and make sure that we get that done. That never happens at the federal level. So do things take a long time? It's all relative. Federally, yes. State, things can change on a dime. Same thing too, so for example, one of MPP's clients in Arizona is Mark Anthony Brewing and Red Bull and White Claw. And so she handles their water policy. There's a big bottling manufacturing plant in West Phoenix. Water policy is its own fascinating thing, but they have lobbyists in all 50 states because they operate in all 50 states. And what happens in Arizona and versus what happens in Colorado versus what happens, because state legislatures are constantly passing all these fascinating little laws. And if you don't have a Laura or a Megan or a Nick in every single state to put the brakes, for example, like that phone call that she got in the morning and we had 3 hours to fix. I mean, I don't know what percentage of Arizona is to their bottom line, but that could have single-handedly, I mean, shareholders would not have been happy. And so they have to pay attention, really close attention everywhere. If you're that big, you have to be smart and make sure you have eyes and ears to the ground everywhere.
Okay, so I have been working in the medical device industry since I graduated college, and I have a company that I'm very passionate about that has a product that can really help patients. And it's going to make such a big difference. Like every hospital has procedures for when they introduce new products and to the hospital. And this is a game changer. Like it can really improve a patient's life to the point where it could potentially prevent that patient from getting their arm or leg cut off, or for them losing function in their abdomen with their abdominal muscles. So one of the problems this company has is that in order to introduce new innovative technology to the American healthcare system, private and public sector of the healthcare system, is that the product needs to get paid for somehow. So either it's paid for by the insurance companies, it's paid for by cash by the patients, or it's paid for by the US government, whether it's the state government or on the federal level, which would be, an example would be Medicare would be paying for it. So for a company like this, how do they get reimbursement for their new innovative technology that's literally going to save lives and save complications and improve the quality of life of patients? How does a company like that navigate how would they utilize a lobbyist to get their product covered by a federal government, paying organization like Medicare, or money allocated to it? I'll let you answer, but I just want to emphasize to everyone who's listening, the problem is the United States is extremely innovative. We have amazing, smart, creative people, and we're allowed to innovate here. But what's happening now is that once everything's getting approved by the FDA, it is now getting stalled by the cost of healthcare in this country. So we actually are sitting on products that could be utilized and fix patients, but it's not happening because hospitals are worried that they're not going to get paid and they're going to go bankrupt.
So that's super interesting. I'm not a healthcare policy expert, but what you're like generally referring to is a problem across all sectors. We're obviously a very big bloated government that moves at a glacial pace, and so that's not unique. But what I would say is that a good lobbyist, if you're trying to do something that's really kind of new and not an existing, for example, I'm sure a lot of big companies have had lobbyists for years and they have their issues and they have their champions in Congress. But if you're trying to break through, what you really need are allies. So typically building a coalition. So you said this helps Dominum, or what?
Well, yeah. So it helps the body heal, right? So if we could go argue like, hey, there should be Medicare reimbursement for this product because it's going to prevent a doctor from cutting this patient's arm off, with a certain, we're talking in general terms. So, Medicare should pay for it. And what Medicare pays for is voted on by Congress.
So here's what I'll say about that. The first thing you want to do in politics is essentially opposition research. Whether you are running for office or whether you are a company trying to, work with Congress, you need to figure out who is against you. So I would be curious to know if there's not any natural competitors, then what other competitors could it potentially impact? Maybe there's another reason why it's not getting through. And so you need to kind of figure that out and figure out a way to either make a deal with them, work with them somehow, alleviate something. But then as far as building a coalition goes, is this they're from like pork products? Is this the company?
Porcine. Mm-hmm.
Porcine. Okay. So yeah, I thought that was super interesting. So right now there's a massive like pork shortage in this country, and that's due to a variety of factors. But California recently passed a law that is making it so that pigs need to have so many feet per wherever they live. It has to be a livable environment, and I'm not sure the definition of what that is, but it's enough to where it's impactful enough to, if farmers were to implement this, it would be so cost prohibitive that many of them would just go out of business. And because California is the largest producer and importer of pork in the country, what they do matters on like substantially. So that's one example of where, okay, this is interesting. So if you're trying to get this product passed, maybe you could align. When they say politics makes strange bedfellows, it's very true. So perhaps you could align with the Pork Farmers Association and become friends with them, because I'm sure they have a long history in Congress. Members know them very well. They're supportive of, different ag communities are supportive of them. So you could potentially kind of wedge your way in that way, and then go from there. And then obviously in parallel track, make sure that you are aligning yourself with the different associations. I would probably hire a public affairs firm in addition to a lobbying firm. Public affairs is kind of like PR. So public affairs maybe you could get white papers written about how this is important to the industry and going to save lives, and anything that you can do to show how it's going to cost the taxpayer less money is also helpful. Maybe get your whoever is the kind of founder of this company, maybe get them, on interviews or speaking on panels, and just elevate the public profile of this person or this industry or this product, so that when lawmakers, when you come in to talk to them about it, they're already they've heard it kind of bouncing around in their heads for a while. And on Capitol Hill, we all read the same publications, and so when you're watching the news at home, you kind of hear everyone speaking from the same chorus, and you're like, how are they all? Did they all have a big meeting and everyone decides what to say every day? That's it, kind of. There's no meeting, but we have this kind of inside baseball news outlets that really only us politicos read. And so if it goes in there, it's going to be read by not just lobbyists, but trade associations and members and their staff. So I would if you're serious about getting this done, I would implement that, elevate its profile, and then go in and talk to them about why it's important. And they'll already know why it's important because they've heard about it for 6 months.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So basically, since you have some of these, so you have a medical device startup company that's obviously relatively, profitable. And if the fact that the United States government will now reimburse the product being used on Medicare patients, this is the old elderly population or other people that for whatever reason have been placed on Medicare, you can basically make the company 10 times more profitable. So it's in their business like that. It'd be in their best interest to hire someone like you to go in and make sure that they're being represented in DC, which is fascinating to me.
Well, that's exactly right. And to your question earlier about a company and why they would, and I mentioned a startup, for example, could potentially 10x their business if they utilize a lobbyist and get something done in Congress. That's a great example of that. I don't know if this is a public or private company, but investors, shareholders would be happy because that would really increase its valuation.
Can you walk us through the process of how a lobbyist engages with the policymakers? So basically, you've been hired by a company. They're your client now, you're representing them, you register that you are a lobbyist representing them. How do you now go and engage with policymakers? When I say policymakers are, elected officials who make decisions in Congress.
The first thing that we would do is we would take some time to kind of do a deep dive and understand the company or industry. It's one of the things that I find the most rewarding about being a lobbyist is that I don't have to know a mile deep, but I have to know a mile wide on whatever issue it is that I'm dealing with. And then if it gets down into the super weeds, I can bring in my client to answer more in-depth conversations. But I do have to understand, at least at a high level, and preferably, kind of just below that, what their industry is, what it does, who are the stakeholders, what are the impacts going to be, what are their needs, both immediately and then 5-10 years out, and just really, really wrap my arms around the situation, because you don't want to start tinkering with anything until you kind of understand the entire lay of the ground. So that's first. And then after that, you would either, like I mentioned, probably do some public affairs to raise awareness. You would want to identify champions. So for example, if this company that you mentioned is a California-based company, ideally we would find, if it's literally a manufacturing company, I would like to find the district of the member who that is in their district, their naturally aligned champion. That's not always the case because sometimes it's politically not expedient for someone to align in this industry, or there's a variety of reasons why. But naturally, especially if it's creating jobs in a district, typically the member of Congress for whose district that is will be a natural ally, because you can only take things so far. You need an actual member to introduce either legislation or an amendment. You have to find someone who's going to officially sponsor your ask. And then from there, their staff is responsible for whipping support for it. So you'll have the sponsor and you'll have the co-sponsors. So the sponsor will introduce the legislation or the amendment, and then they will try to get as many co-sponsors as they possibly can onto that. And then when it goes to the committee to be voted on, the committee chair will see, well, this has, 18 of my colleagues, all of whom I respect, they all want this to happen. So, I'm more likely than if someone just was a standalone person to put this to a vote on the floor. Sometimes politics gets in the way of that. Sometimes, even if it makes all the sense in the world, maybe I'm having maybe for other reasons other than just that very simple example, maybe I think that the person putting forth this legislation should not be in Congress at all. And I want to make sure that they are stymied at every level. I might hold the bill. I might not allow it to go to the floor. So you also, as a lobbyist, have to make sure you choose the right champion who you think is going to be the best vehicle to get your issue heard and ultimately signed into law. So I hope that answers that. I think that's sort of the process. And then once it gets out of committee, then it'll go to the other chamber, the Senate or the House side, for a vote. Obviously, if it's originating in if it has anything to do with money, which most things do, it has to originate in the House and then goes to the Senate. If it passes out of the Senate in the exact same kind of process that I described in the House, then if it passes without any amendments, as it was written in the House form, it will then go to the floor for a full vote before the president signs it into law. If there are amendments, it has to go back to the House, and the whole process starts over again, and make sure that there's consensus between the two sides. And then at which point, once there is, it will then go to the floor and then get signed into law if it passes.
I see. Okay. So what if, a lot of business owners probably don't know that they need to be involved with the legislative process, or that the legislative process could potentially affect their business? How would you advise these business owners to stay informed and involved in the legislative process?
I would say a pretty low cost, effective way is to be a member of an association. So an association is essentially where different businesses will pool their resources to pay for a lobbyist. So it can be expensive. So maybe I'm a small business and I don't want to pay the full cost to have my own personal full-time lobbyist in DC. However, I do want my pulse on things, like you said. So I'm going to join, the Farm Bureau Association, for example, and I will I will know that they're advocating for my interests in DC. So that's an easy way. Now, that being said, within the same industry, there are oftentimes divergent interests. So they may think of it like a Venn diagram, a circle, where they agree on, let's say, 80%, but then there's that 20% in the outer perimeter circle that they disagree on. So, for example, the American Truckers Association, those guys are friends of mine. They represent all of truckers in that industry across America. But then you have the small Truckers Association. So their interest, when you have a fleet of 5,000 trucks versus 4 trucks, you agree on a lot, different highway bills and things. But there are some things that, if they vote on a bill, and this is across every industry, whether it's healthcare, trucking, farming, the big guys have their own interests and the little guys have their own interests. And that's just going to be the case no matter what. The big guys prefer more regulation because it kind of keeps the little guys out. The little guys are always going to be voting for or pushing for deregulation because it allows them to break in. So there are those, sometimes it behooves you to hire your own lobbyist if you think it's important enough that if you get your interest heard, then you can break away from the association and hire your own. But an easy, quick way is to just have an association, and then you would actually know what's coming down the pike, and you're like, oh, well, this big bill's coming down. I agree with 80% of what the big guys are lobbying for, but this is actually going to hurt me. I probably should hire my own to make sure that my voice is heard.
Amazing. Okay, that makes complete sense. Thank you for explaining that. So in the next decade or so, how do you think lobbying is going to evolve? Do you think there's going to be any changes? Do you think we're always going to have the lobbying industry? People complain about our politics and government, but it seems to work if you can get the right lobbyists.
I actually feel, I don't know, I guess the word is good about our job security, just because there's nothing in as far as I know, I mean, there's very few industries like it, which are so personally relationship oriented. There's a lot of obviously noise today around AI and how that's going to replace so many jobs. And that's true. Hopefully it won't replace jobs, but it will augment them. I heard an analogy, or I think I read an analogy somewhere yesterday that said AI will replace jobs the way that microwaves replaced cooking. And I thought that was pretty good because microwaves have replaced cooking in a lot of ways, but not at all entirely. And every step of the way, you prefer a home cooked meal as opposed to a microwave. So I think that you get what you pay for. So the way AI will change our world, I think will be a net positive. But as far as lobbyists go, you can't AI your way into lobbying. It's impossible. Now, of course, we use it to help write our memos and learn. But at its core, lobbying is such a personal relationship industry that I feel really good about it. And again, unless there really is no other vehicle to teach lawmakers what their industries that they're voting on are about. So it's not going anywhere. It has to be relationship oriented. And unfortunately, the politics isn't getting any easier. So you're going to have two sides to the story, and that's not going anywhere either.
I know. I always think of lobbying like being a medical device sales rep, because medical device sales reps or pharmaceutical reps, their job is to go to doctors who've had all this education and are in positions of power and positions to, help people save lives or change people's lives. And your job as the rep was to educate them on, this is why you should use this product, this is why you should do this. And lobbyists are now, the reps for Congress, and you have representation from all the states and DC, and their job is to go to these elected officials and say, hey, you have all this power, but let me tell you, maybe you should consider voting this way, or maybe you should have this initiative or this policy. And it's a really interesting job, and it's a lot, it's a lot of it's important, and it's a lot of relationship building and networking, and it's crazy. People don't realize that this is going on, but they can't assume that, these elected officials know everything. They need the lobbyists to educate them. And go ahead.
Well, they do. And I actually think I might use that going forward as an example, because people always ask me, what is this and what do they do? But I think people are generally more aware of a medical device sales than lobbying. So that's a really great example. You're 100% right. I mean, if a pharmaceutical company comes out with a new life-saving medication, how on earth is the doctor ever going to hear about it without a rep telling them? So that's exactly right. Doctors are not part of all the things that are coming out. They get told. And so that's exactly right. And a great analogy.
Well, on that note, I think I enjoyed talking to you today, and we should, I think a lot of listeners are people that listen are business owners, and they will probably be very interested in what we have to say, because I don't think anyone really knows too much about the lobbying industry. So I had a lot of fun talking to you about this.
Likewise. Yeah. Happy to chat anytime. And any business owners that would like to learn more. Yeah. Happy to chat.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Business Talk podcast and leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Thank you for joining us today. This has been another episode of Business Talk with Meghan McNulty.